This video will serve as a little tutorial for people who are having trouble using the Cel Shading V2 by me, and is also just going to go over some problems that you might be having and how to fix them. So before we get into the video, I'm going to just say really quick that this does not work fully on Blender 4.2 because of the EV changes that they made, and also it is not compatible at all with cycles. So you're going to be wanting to use Blender 4.1 and previous with the EV rendering engine. So you'll see here, we're on Blender 4.1 and we're on EV. Now it does technically work on 4.2, it's just that it's not set up with that in mind, so you won't get the expected results. So with that quick disclaimer out of the way, we're just going to show you a very quick example of how to actually use a shader. So if you just want to use a shader, you don't really care for using the TF2 mercs, what you'll see here, this is the master cel shader. It is just a sphere. And if we enable a sun really quick, you'll see this is what it looks like. Now, all the shader data is already packed within this file. So if you want, you just go to the shading tab, change this up to rendered view. And all I have to do is copy this group or this shader setup into anything that you want. For example, spawn in just a normal cube, copy this shader setup, delete this, and now it should be working. You can see it has the hash lines and the red. That means that it's working. And then from here, you can edit it to your liking. Or alternatively, you can simply just append this material, grouped master cel shader. And let's say, for example, I appended it. Of course, I don't have to because I'm in the same project. And then just click this. It'll make a duplicate. And now you can edit it to your liking. Of course, if you have a specific shader in mind that you want to turn into a cel shader, you're going to have to change this input and likely change a bunch of settings to fit your liking. But it's pretty easy and really will not take up much of your time at all. The real meat and potatoes is where we go into the pre-setup mercenaries. So if we were to go and unhide Demo Man, you'll see that his textures render just fine. Now, if this does not render for you properly, it is because your texture file paths are not correct. This is because none of the textures are actually packed into this file. They all depend on the linked textures from TF2 collection. You'll see here that it's linked. Now, the reason for this is because if I were to pack the textures, this would be a very large file size. And if you already have the textures from the TF2 collection, there's no reason to have both. So let's say, for example, that you're missing some textures. Now, I obviously can't replicate that because, you know, I already have them working. Well, let's just say that his texture is missing. Now, this is because of a file path mismatch. So if we were to go to up at the top here, click Blender File, and then go down here, you'll see we have all the normal ones set up, but when we go here and press reload, it can't find it because it's an invalid path. Now, all you have to do is right click, click relocate, and then just navigate to your TF2 rigs folder and your rig that you use. I'm using his animations, so we'll just click demo.blend, give it a second, and you'll see it refreshed to rigs his animations 4.0 demo.blend, and then we should just be able to find Demo Man Red demo.blend, and it is now here, nice and easy. So that's what you should do if your textures aren't working and you're using the TF2 version. Now, this could also happen if you append. So what I recommend doing is just go through all of the included mercs here or the Blender file and just redefine these 9 paths for the mercenaries, and then after the fact it should just work perfectly and you'll be able to append. Now this will change depending on the user, but it's essentially wherever you downloaded your rigs. Now let's go into some more details of how to exactly use it and what everything in the shader actually does, and we'll go over some questions that people have been asking. Let's say, for example, you have a brand new model here, you just want to put the shader on it. What you're going to want to do, go to the shading tab or whatever tab you want. You want to click new, and then in this material, you can either copy paste the material from here, which is the master cel shader object, or alternatively, you could do file append, navigate to the cel shading V2, go to node tree, and then grab the master cel shader node tree, click append, then press shift A, search, master cel shader, and then it's here. You can expand it. And in order to do this, all you gotta want to do is take any shader that you like, plug it into the shader tab, and then plug this into the material output, and it should work like a charm. So if you see here, if we just use the default configuration, you'll see that we get a bit of strange color banding. That is because that the colors here, here, and here are not actually based off the shader. They are solid colors. So if you were to darken this up a bit, you'll see that it just stays that solid color. Now this is nice if you want a shade tone that just stays one solid color. However, if you say have a texture that you want to use, or you instead want these to act as mixings or blendings instead of just a flat color, so what you're going to want to do is grab your image texture or RGB. So if you're using a principled BSDF, you're just going to copy the color here, paste it there, and then plug it back in. It will have no effect until we grab a brightness contrast node, plug this in there, plug this in the mid, and now using this, we can make it darker, have more contrast, or if you want even more fine-tuned, you can grab a hue saturation and plug that here. This is a white color, so you won't see many changes. However, if we were to change it to, example, pinker, turn that up a bit, we can change the hue over here, and this will have an effect on a texture if we're using a texture. So if you grab a noise texture, for example, and use this as the color instead, and really just fine-tune it to whatever we want. And of course, we can repeat this process for the low tone by just copying and pasting. And then if we take this brightness down even more, you'll see that the low accumulates right next to the rim color. Now, for those of you who don't want this highlight color, it's really as simple as just turning it off over there. So there's no more highlight. And that highlight is really just as a fun little shadow thing. It occupies the line after, so basically the shadow works as like the edge to the highlight. You can, of course, edit the threshold of the highlight if you want it to appear darker. However, you can only go to a certain point or until it just stops appearing. This is all based on the shader. So if you're not getting the result that you want, you can always go up here and change the shader materials. And of course, you can turn it off. Now, if we were to turn on rim light, all that does is you see up here, it has a simple rim light. We can change the exponent and the strength. Now, strength just makes it brighter, and the exponent just makes it cover up more. You see this? This looks like a lot like the rim light from TF2. If you're familiar with how that works or looks. The default value is 50, and that gives you a very sharp rim light. But you can decrease it if you would like, if you want a softer one. Make it hella bright. And this looks best with lower poly models, as you can see. But it works just fine with higher poly ones. And of course, you can change the color of this rim light. And then you could also have a normal map for the rim light. Now, if you have a TF2 character, they usually have a normal map for the rim light. However, you don't need one. And of course, as with all the colors, this does have a custom input, so if you want to be based off of the texture, you see it is now based off the texture and gives it this really neat effect, kind of like pearlescence. And then here we have halftone. Now, halftone only really works with invisible shadow. And see here, if I increase the threshold, which makes it appear more, you'll see we have a nice halftone effect. Now, the halftone is based on the active camera. So you will need an active camera in order for it to work properly. And this is because it stays the same scale, no matter how far you zoom away from it, to give it that comic effect. And then you can increase or decrease the size of the halftone with this scale thing. And then if you were to change this, if you hover over, dot is 0, 1 is stripe, and that just simply lets you change it between dots and stripes. And then if you would like to change the color, you could turn this to 1, and then here you can change the shadow color. And then to go over the last thing, there are some thresholds. Now for the high threshold, you usually want to keep this at 1, so that just makes it work as normal. What you want to edit with is the mid and the low threshold here. Now they're pretty self-explanatory. They determine how much of effect it has. Now this isn't a true cel shader, it is a quote-unquote physically based cel shader. It is based off of the shader over here. So if I were to take this down to 0, it will just act as normal, as if it was the principal BSDF. If I take it up, you'll see it acts more as a cel shader. And then the low threshold just determines how much of it is covered in shadow. And one last thing is that if you want to add the outline, which all the mercs have, you will go over here, click Add Modifier, Geometry Nodes, over here, and click Geo Outline. And now you'll see it has a nice outline. And by default, this is just set to camera. It's not set to any particular camera. So if you want to, this is camera determinant, so if I get rid of this, it doesn't need a camera to work properly. You could just click this camera. And now if I enter its view, it has a outline based off of the camera's position. So if I were to select this camera and move it around, you'll see the outline changes. Of course, it's kind of hard to tell, so let's go out, and you'll see as I move the camera, the outline moves with it. Now the outline has multiple properties. It has thickness, which of course affects the thickness of the outline. This is a very precise number, so small increments will have little effect. I suggest keeping it at either 1 for very thin outlines, which you can see, or 5 for thicker, or if you want to push it, 10 for big boy outlines. Now you'll see it does kind of start clipping when you go past 1, but if you want to fix that, you could just change the depth offset. If you take this down to 0, it would begin clipping into it. However, if we were to take this up, you'll see that it effectively moves forward and backward. So if we were to get out of the camera view and adjust the depth offset, this is essentially what it's doing. I like keeping it at 1 or 0. 0 essentially is a very, very close hull, whereas 1 takes it back a bit, so that prevents it from outlining certain things. And then let's say you only want the back of the character to be outlined, you just have a very large depth offset. And now you'll see only the outline of the character is outlined, nothing inside will be outlined because it is not intersecting whatsoever. And the base material will conflict with outline all materials. So essentially, if you want all the materials on one object to be outlined, you just click Outline All Materials. However, you can have multiple outlines with different settings based on material. And if you would like that, you just disable this, change the base material to, let's just change it to material. And now it works just fine. However, it will be more laggy the more geometry node setups you have. So if you would like each individual material to have their own outline, change that there. However, I think outline on materials works just fine. And then you can enable distance scaling and distance clamping over here. And essentially what that does is, if I were to take the camera back, it will scale the outline up depending on how far the camera is. Now for this especially, you want to take the thickness down to 1. Just because, as you saw earlier, thicknesses that are too high will get some artifacting. Even 5 will be pushing it. Yeah, you get artifacting there. So that's what distance clamping is for. And distance clamping lets you use the max distance sliders over here and min distance sliders. And essentially what they do is they make sure that it doesn't reach a certain size. So if I make this 2, you'll see it will only go up to 2. And then over here, you can change the material of the outline to something weird if you want. You can really change it to anything, even itself, and that'll create some strange little things, almost like a duplicate. Yeah, really mess with this however you like. And then over here, if you open the manage, you can bake it, and that's the path you can bake it to. And then named attributes will only come into play if you actually use vertex color instead of a UV map. Vertex color is really only for specific things. So if you were to set up a custom vertex color setup with vertex colors, then that's what you use this for. But it can also just use the UV map. I recommend just using the UV map. However, you want very, 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 very precise control, you can set up manually a vertex color and use that for geometry nodes. If you want to set this up for anything, all you have to do is go to File, Append, go up one, and then go to Node Tree, Geo Outline, and then append it. And then it'll automatically append the camera that it comes with, and then you can change this to that, and it'll have everything work just fine. And that is essentially how this little collection works. Hopefully that helps you use it in your projects, and yeah, thank you for your interest in downloading it.